This is Aaron Cohen. He's one of my best friends, which I'm really excited about. And I've mentioned before some of the things that he does on social media. But for anybody that doesn't know him, he's a photographer. He is an ex-rocket scientist. He is a engineer at Lyft, working on self-driving cars, and amongst like many other things. He's just a good dude. And so I'm happy to have you here talking about creativity and life and purpose and all that good stuff. So
Right. Happy to be here.
Welcome. All right, I'm gonna get my screen situated. Sharona, thanks for joining us too. Feel free to jump in anytime. So I've got coffee, decaf, with a little bit of oat milk. What do you got going on?
I got water because I already had my coffee this morning, but I actually just ran out of cold brew. So the situation is pretty dire in this apartment right now.
No cold brew for you.
No.
Your camera looks good. What are we?
Of course it would.
Can you tell us about your camera setup or mic setup? Do you have a fancy setup?
Oh, this is my photography camera through the video capture device onto my computer. So this is like my Sony A7R going directly into that. It's an Elgato like capture device.
Nice. I have an Elgato like 1080p 60 some like whatever capture device.
That's perfect.
But my computer doesn't have two graphics cards, so it can't use it. And it just, I think I made a terrible mistake when I bought this computer because I didn't upgrade to the one that had a designated graphics card. Yeah, super stupid in retrospect, but you know, whatever. My video could look crispy.
Mistake, like 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
Yeah, it was like a mistake 3 years ago. It's been just hurting ever since.
Yeah.
Actually, I need to go to my storage in Jackson Heights so I can get my actual, like, I just have like a little webcam that's actually pretty great. That's better than the built-in one. So anyway, I let's start it out with I would love for you just to talk about. So one thing that I thought would be really good to talk about is the relationship between work and play, or creative endeavors versus professional endeavors. And I think one thing that you've done really adeptly is have a professional career that you're just killing it at, and then also doing creative things like photography and you've maintained an active climbing. At the very least, you're like around people who are climbing, even if you're not like climbing super hard all the time yourself.
Right.
But like, where did that come from?
What are you trying to say there?
No, I'm not saying that you're not strong.
That's a hard question. Where did it come from? I don't know. I'll talk a little bit about like my career path, like how I got to like where I am today. I remember like being extremely excited to turn 9 years old because that was the minimum age for going to space camp.
Nice.
And so I went to space camp twice, once when I was 9 and once when I was 10. And that I was like super hooked on space before, and that like just like totally brainwashed me into like, you know, being hyped on like going to space. And like I was at like 9 years old and I was like, yeah, I'm going to be an astronaut. This is for sure a reasonable career path for me to expect to have. As I got a little older, I was like, okay, well maybe astronaut's not like the most realistic career ambition, but I could like go to school for aerospace engineering and like learn to build like spacecraft and whatnot. So I did that, and I went to San Jose State University, got a bachelor's in aerospace engineering. I had my senior design project sponsored by NASA. And as I was like presenting it to all the NASA people at the end of the year for our like end of year presentation, the guy who was soon to become my boss walked out of that presentation and down into HR and said, "Aaron starts Monday."
What?
So that was kind of how I got started at NASA. Yep.
What was your presentation about that was so powerful to this guy?
So we made this, it was like a test bed for developing motion control systems for satellites. And one of the things that's like hard to simulate about like satellites on the ground is that, you know, satellites in space have like very little so almost no air in space. So there's like no air resistance. And the simulation of microgravity is really hard to simulate on the ground too.
Hmm.
So we developed a float table, which enables you to simulate 3 degree of freedom, like free motion. So you have like a flat glass table, and then you have this like device that it's like a porous stone like surface that's perfectly smooth, and you pump air through it, and so the device kind of floats on this flat table, and so it can spin in place freely as if there's no like gravity or friction, and it can translate like left and right and forward and backwards. And we built a little like device that sits on top of it with these little like cold gas thrusters that could like shoot puffs of air to kind of move it around the table. And that was a really cool project. I really enjoyed that.
How small are we talking?
People,
Are we talking about like
it was like,
how large is it?
about the size of like a 2-gallon like jug. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a little larger than a bread box.
Yes. It wasn't as small as we'd hoped for it to be, but it was mostly just like rigging and stuff like that. You had to have a lot of like CO2 gas for this float table to work properly.
Whoa. So you got your job at NASA, and then, that led to a career in engineering and being a rocket scientist and a satellite engineer.
I was there for 7 years. I worked on a guidance computer for a suborbital rocket. So I think I can like actually use the title rocket scientist. I'm actually still waiting to this day for our patent to be accepted for a low-cost guidance computer for, $10,000 or less. It's pretty low cost for a guidance computer for rocket. I can tell you that.
And then, that led into your current position with autonomous cars. Then let me just share this story because I think it's really great. I remember one time we were hanging out in New York and I used to introduce you as my friend Aaron. He works at NASA, or my friend Aaron, he's a rocket scientist, or something like that, when we would be out. And then you like asked me one time to not do that. or maybe it was after I'd done the sticky note thing and went viral, and my project went viral, and so you had introduced me as like, whatever, the sticky note guy, the whatever. And then we talked a little bit about like being in a box and how there's more to our being than whatever the most notable thing in society might be, or whatever. Because like rocket scientist is like a big deal, so I assume that was like a cool thing. But
I'm definitely very proud of it, and it was definitely part of my identity. It continues to be part of my identity. I still identify as like a former NASA rocket scientist, even though I was only there for like 7 years. But that's a small career at NASA. And it's like you said, you don't want to like be like squished into a box and like being introduced as like the NASA guy and always being known like, oh, the NASA guy.
Right.
I'm trying to think of the context, but I remember a story explicitly where someone was like struggling to remember my name, like, oh yeah, you're the NASA guy, right? And it was just like, yep, that's just like, to most people when they meet me, that's like what sticks in their memory and burns in, right?
Yeah, for me it's the sticky note guy. I feel like they're a little different. I mean, they're like pretty much the same in terms of like hierarchy in society, but so aside from being the NASA guy or the rocket scientist, you've had this great I would say it's more than a hobby. I would say it's a creative path that you've been on to doing photography. How long have you been doing that, and what got you started in the first place?
Actually, it was around the same age when I went to space camp. I was probably like 8 years old when my parents got me this like a little Olympus point and shoot camera. It was the kind where like you have like the slide cover over the lens, like you slide it over, the lens comes out. It was a really cool little camera, 35 millimeter. And I can't remember what the first time I used it was, but we went on this like cruise. It was like the Disney cruise when I was a kid. It's the only time I've ever been on a cruise in my life. I took tons of photos, and I have the photo album somewhere still. It's like all the photos are terrible, but it's like really like that first time you get a camera in your hand, and for some people it just kind of like it hooks you.
Yeah,
that ability to like produce photos. And so I did that for a really long time. I got a digital camera when I was 13. It was a 2 megapixel camera. It had this like 8 megabyte flash card. I could take like 20 photos or something like that. And it was like the most like basic setup back like in the early days of digital cameras. And then when I got into high school, I took a film class. So I took a 1 year like film photography class, and I took 1 year digital photography class. And that was really what set off like my interest of like photography as like an art more than just like a way of capturing memories.
Mm.
And I've just kind of been hooked on it ever since. I used to shoot film almost exclusively until about 2015. I really like the film process. I really love like the high quality of the images you get from such like an expensive camera. I have this like old Minolta, like X700 film camera. It was like one of the first cameras to come out with like the light meter integrated to the shutter speed, so that the light meter would set the shutter speed, like a program automatic mode. And that was really handy for like, you don't always want to be shooting in manual mode if you're trying to like capture moments and that sort of stuff. But in 2015, I kind of like looked at my credit card bill for how much I was spending on developing film. And it was like, several $100s a year. And I thought about it and I was like, well, it would be a lot more cost effective if I had a digital camera, even though the digital cameras are relatively expensive. But little did I know that getting into digital cameras is like a rabbit hole, because you can't just buy the camera, you get to buy all the lenses and stuff like that. But I'm glad I did.
So you think it's more of a rabbit hole than film?
Film. It depends. So like film, you can go like a different way. If you want to go down like the antique camera realm, like, I need like this one specific antique camera, and like for some reason antique cameras are super popular right now, and like you could spend like $5,000 on a camera that came out like 30 years ago. I respect that. Like those are like beautiful cameras. I would love to have some of these film cameras, but I try to think about it of like, when you make a gear decision, you don't want to like be like, I need this camera because it's going to enable me to produce art in some sort of way. It's more like a novelty sort of thing. Like, I kind of like this camera, it'd be cool to own, sort of thing. And for that sort of like novelty, I'm not going to spend $5,000 on an old X-Pan camera.
I'm going to try and put in a headphone so I can listen to you here. And I don't know what's going to happen to our audio, but hopefully it will just do the thing and not be too terrible. Let's see what happens. I assume you can still hear me.
Yep.
And then we are going to do same system for speaker. Can you speak for me?
I'm talking. Noise.
Perfect.
Sound.
Okay, great. Okay. You're in my head. So let's look at some of your photography. Let's go to that website. All right. So I'm going to screen share your website, and we'll go through it so we can check out some of your photos. We'll screen share. Here we go. Let's go to your front page first. All right.
My very sophisticated Squarespace automated generated website.
Okay, so you have portraits, outdoor, and then we'll check out your gram. Yeah. But where do we want to go first? Portraits or outdoor?
Let's go to outdoor.
Okay.
As you know, I'm really into like hiking, backpacking, rock climbing, that sort of stuff. And I think that that's really a cool opportunity to like take photos. This one on the upper right here of my old coworker, Wes, it's one of my favorite photos. I just love how the light is like glowing behind him. It's Adele.
Oops.
Oh, it's like auto playing on a slideshow, or?
I think so. Let's go back. I might have been clicking.
Oh yeah, I think if you click on the image, it'll autoplay. Yeah. That's in Bishop, California, doing some rock climbing out in the buttermilks. If you skip forward a couple ones to the pink sunrise, this is in Patagonia when we were hiking the W down in Torres del Paine National Park.
Whoa.
It was just so surreal. That place was amazing. You're such a southern latitude that the like alpine glacial terrain is very low elevation. So we were only like a couple thousand feet in elevation at this point. But it was like we were up at the mountains, like 14,000 feet in California. It was so beautiful.
Whoa. I have never been, but it looks like an amazing.
Yeah. The one thing I'll say about Patagonia, it was so beautiful and I'm so glad that we went, but it was so crowded. It was such a popular tourist destination. And, I guess I kind of fell into that like trap of like, seeing stuff on Instagram, like, oh, this is pretty cool, I should go. And like everyone else had the same idea.
Sure.
But You could find some places where there weren't too many people in the photos.
Some tandem. What is this?
This is
Acro
acro
yoga.
yoga. Yeah.
Nice. So you have a lot of friends that you take pictures of that are climbing.
Yeah.
And we were talking about how we don't have a lot of pictures of each other or ourselves.
Yeah.
But I think that, there are certain people that take lots of pictures and there are certain people that just end up in front of cameras. And I think it's so great to celebrate people who take lots of pictures because, these just wouldn't exist if you weren't
Yeah.
shooting them. And certainly it's great that you have some skill to
Right.
capture it for
I'm
friends.
always behind the camera. I'm never in front of it.
Well, I like putting you in the front of my camera, but then there's still like you and I don't actually ever have. I was trying to find a picture of the two of us to show for this, and we just didn't have it, which is weird because we've been friends and very close for a long time.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the gallery. Let's see. Is there any photos that you want to point out as like?
I think if you scroll down towards the bottom,
like
my more recent photos.
How did you catch this lightning crack?
Oh, that was pretty good luck actually. So what I was doing was I was taking long exposures. I think that one might have been like 5 or 10 seconds, and there was a huge. So let's tell you the story about this image because it actually ties into my rocket science and my photography. So this is from my hotel room in Chincoteague, Virginia, which is the town that's across the channel. I think it's called, or whatever waterway that is, from Wallops Flight Facility, the NASA facility out in the eastern shore of Virginia. And so I had a hotel room that was right on the channel, and my balcony overlooked this like giant swamp channel sort of thing. That's the causeway that goes between the mainland and the island. And there was a huge like East Coast thunderstorm that rolled in. It was like lightning bolt every like 10 or 15 seconds sort of thing. And so I just sat out there with my camera in long exposure mode trying to capture lightning. And I got a ton of lightning strikes, but this was like the most like scenic looking one, I thought.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's crazy to see how like the veins of it they're not just going down, they're like going like out into
the cloud and stuff like that.
It's super cool. That's awesome. All right.
I think if you just press escape, it goes back to the gallery. I'm not really sure.
I will try it on the next one. Let's look at like a few more and then we can go over to your portrait section. This one's really cool.
Yeah, that's at, what is that called? Canyon Creek Trail up in the Trinity Alps. That's Torrey.
So again, one thing that I find notable about this is that you folded in a few things that you really enjoy. So you have photography and then you're combining that with the places that you go.
Right.
Like, you have a passion for rock climbing and you have a passion for people and you have a passion for nature and you have a passion for portraits. You're sort of like blending all those things together. And I find that, really admirable. And a lot of people don't think to, or they just don't fold in the like creative elements in this way. And I think this is pretty amazing.
It's one of the reasons actually I struggled to name this gallery because it's not really landscapes. So there's so many like people and like editorial style photos in here. What it really is just like life outdoors. Here's a bunch of friends on Buttermilk, or just out next to Buttermilk Road in Bishop. It's on Line Road. And
are you organizing these trips? Are you?
No.
So hey, there's me.
Tori's the organizer.
Hey.
That should really be portraits, I suppose, but.
This guy looks familiar.
Yeah, that was that day, right after the election in 2016.
Yeah,
that's actually Adam in the background. You see him?
I see him. So what's really interesting about this photo is I had been doing subway therapy, and for anybody that's familiar with my work, I go out and I dress up like a therapist, like in this photo, and then I will just sit and talk with anybody that wants to come and chat, and then sometimes I would incorporate writing in some way. And so after the election 2016, I bring sticky notes out into the subway, and tens of thousands of people wrote on sticky notes in the next small period. And it was so wild that it just so happened that Aaron, you were visiting me the day like it was like the day after
The
or
day after, yeah.
the second day that like my project was blowing up and going viral. And
Because the
so,
election was on a Tuesday, and I think I landed on a Thursday, so it wasn't 2 days after. Yeah,
yeah.
but
So I think it came on
mid-November, great
Friday.
time for cheap flights to New York.
Yeah, that was on Saturday for sure because Adam was there.
Oh, that's right.
And it was just so great to have a friend there that I knew was like really uh
Yeah.
uh comfortable and like skilled with the camera. And
Mm.
like some of the pictures that I used in museums and
Yeah.
in other publications were from you being there. And it was like it
So,
was just like what a lucky thing for me, you know.
and not to geek out too much on photography here, but I don't know if you remember the context behind me taking this photo, but this is like when you were being interviewed by one of the news stations, right?
Right, because I have a little lapel mic on
Yeah.
my tie, which I can see.
So I remember before I took this photo, I had a general like 24 to 70 millimeter lens on my camera, and I wanted to switch to my 85 millimeter portrait lens to take a nice like portrait view. I want to get that nice bokeh, like the people in the background kind of like blurring out so you could tell that you were the
Right.
subject of the photo. And I'm like kneeling down on the ground in this subway transfer hallway, whatever they're called, changing lenses, and this like professional videographer guy goes like, "Oh, changing lenses in the subway? What an amateur!" And I was like,
No way,
"Yes,
really?
yes." I was like, "Yes, I am an amateur. Like I am not a professional photographer."
Wait, so he was talking about how messed up it was that you were changing lenses because it might get dust in the what is
Yeah, I mean, well, so a
the
professional
sensor?
photographer, especially if you're capturing like a live subject, you bring two cameras. And actually, now I do have two cameras, so I can just swap between cameras.
Okay.
Um, I don't know if it's so much as like the getting dust or anything like that. It's just literally like, you know, not being ready to capture the shot. Because imagine like the downtime of like trying to capture
Right.
a shot of a person, like if something's happening live. Um, but yeah, it was one of the things that stuck with me because it was like the guy was like, "What an amateur." I was like, "Yes, I am."
I don't remember you ever telling me that story. It's so funny.
Yeah, I don't know if you were probably too busy like being in front of the camera to be interviewed.
But it's just like what a funny thing to have somebody say to you, you know?
Yeah.
We're still screen sharing, right? You can see all this.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, cool. Um, sweet.
Search and rescue.
Search and rescue. So can you tell us a little bit about your search and rescue life? Is there more
Yeah.
photos of that or?
So I think those might be the only three.
Okay.
I got involved in search and rescue about 7 years ago or so. While I was at NASA, they have a team at NASA Ames called NASA DART, Disaster Assistance and Rescue Team.
Okay.
And it's kind of weird that like NASA has a search and rescue team. I'm still not fully aware of like why or how that came into being. But generally, what I understand is that after the 1989 earthquake, there's this big move for people to have like Bay Area like search and rescue resources. And like, in compliance with the Stafford Act, like most federal agencies are required to be able to help in an emergency situation. And so NASA Ames decided they were going to have a collapse structure rescue team. So I was formally trained in collapse structure rescue and technical rope rescue. I did that for about 4 years. And then when I left NASA, actually right before I left NASA, I joined California Task Force 3, which is a FEMA urban search and rescue team out of Menlo Park. And I got involved with that because as morbid as this might sound, I was kind of like, you know, I'm never going to really get deployed if I'm just waiting for the big earthquake. That happens like once every like 70 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to join a team that got a little more, you know, I don't, as much as I hate to say it, like action or whatever. You know,
Yeah, you wanted to be out there helping people.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's hard to think about because like you only get sent as like a FEMA search and rescue team to places that are like in dire need of help. So you don't like hope for disasters to happen. But you spend a lot of time training, and it's good to, you know, get out there and like use your skills. Because if you only ever use your skills in like a training class or like learning classes online or whatever, it's not the same as like being out there and like actually using your skills, like knowing what works and like knowing what you have to do better next time. That sort of stuff.
Cool. And let's jump onto your other page.
Sure.
While we're on your website. And so you've been doing more portraits. I know I've seen on your Instagram that you've been doing portraits and you've been doing outdoor stuff.
Yeah.
How do you find different people that are interested in doing these kind of shots? Because they're a bit more on the like spicy side, right?
Yeah, I mean, Instagram is a great like networking resource. There's plenty of like Facebook meetup groups. When I went to San Francisco, I didn't have a lot of friends in San Francisco. So I reached out, you know, these photos right here are of Tori, who was my roommate at the time. And she was
looks
working
like
on a fashion blog.
This is fantastic. So I think some of you in the room know Tori, and you did a whole series of LaCroix photos, right?
Yeah, we paired outfits to LaCroix cans. So this is Pamplemousse right there.
Pamplemousse, so good. Let's keep
Yeah.
scrolling. So sometimes people will approach you. Sometimes, are you on any websites where people can find you if they're interested in doing photographs?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. That's a good one to reach out to me at. And my website has a contact page as well, aaronxcohen.com.
Cool. This is our friend Jamelin.
Mm-hmm.
So where did you go? What is this? Salt?
Oh, I love this spot. So this is in El Viso. This is the Salt Flats. And I don't really know. I have to figure out what the seasonality of this is. Like one time a year, usually they're kind of like low and they drain down, and the water becomes this weird like salty brown color, and it looks like an alien planet. I love it. I love like the reflections here. It looks like she's on a different planet.
Yeah. How do you pick the spots where you go to shoot?
It's a variety of different ways. Generally speaking, I'm usually just outdoors somewhere, and I happen to be there, and I'm a beautiful spot.
Okay.
Like the Alviso thing, it was just one of those things where I was like browsing around on Instagram location tags, and you can see like places other people have gone. And a lot of times you'll find somewhere like someone has just taken like a selfie, like a weird, like not particularly like creative photo in an area, and you're like, oh man, that would be a really cool spot for a photo.
Sweet. So this is your Instagram. If anybody's interested
Yep.
in checking out Aaron's Instagram, it's Aaron X Cohen on Instagram. And, I've been a big fan of your photography for a long time.
Mm.
And I'm happy to be a follower of yours.
Yeah.
Go for it.
I was gonna say I have a very like uncohesive theme of like portraits and outdoors and rock climbing and that sort of stuff. But I just post whatever I enjoy.
Yeah. So you do a lot of backpacking too, right?
Yeah, this is from the John Muir Trail. Last summer, Sarah and I hiked 226 miles in 17 days.
Whoa.
Hiking about 15 plus miles a day average. We stopped twice to resupply. But we spent every single night, in a tent, just sleeping on the ground. It's a really
How heavy
cool
was
experience.
your pack?
When at resupply time, they're about 36 pounds. And I think about 7 pounds of that was food. So you'd eat through the food over the course of like a week or so.
Yeah, it's that relationship that you have between wanting enough food and then eating it, but then also not wanting to wait.
Yeah. Actually, one of the really interesting things about that trip was we had planned all these meals, and I had a packet of granola for breakfast every day.
Yeah.
And when I got to one of the first stops is Red's Meadow on day 6, we just threw away not threw away. We donated, they have these hiker bins, we could donate food. We donated all of our granola for breakfast just because there were two things. So first, we realized that we didn't want to be spending time in the morning, like preparing breakfast, eating it, cleaning up, and then hiking. We just wanted to hit the trail as soon as possible. Sure. And the other thing is that like, for some reason, some people get hiker hunger on long backpacking trips. Both of us were just like, we weren't that hungry. So I had planned out something like 3,500 calories per day of food, which is like a pretty typical like heavy exercise like calorie load.
Right.
I probably only ended up eating about 1,600 to 1,700 calories per day.
Which doesn't seem like enough.
It's not enough. I lost 20 pounds in the course of 3 weeks.
Yeah, I remember when you came back, you looked like a skeleton.
You know what it was though? Is like, when you're up at altitude and you're hiking really strenuously, for some reason for me, I didn't get hungry. I was always full. I was never like starving or famished. I don't know if that's the altitude. I don't know if it's like that I was drinking like 4 liters of water a day, and so I didn't feel as hungry, but I felt great.
If anybody wants to jump in at any time, feel free. You can unmic yourself or give me a thumbs up emote to show that you want to jump in and ask a question. But
I'm happy to take questions about rocket science or self-driving cars or backpacking or photography or whatever.
Also, something, again, that I think that you have done really well is find balance between work and other pursuits, whether
Yeah.
it's like hobbies, like hiking or backpacking, or creative endeavors like photography. I find that to be really impressive that you can create that balance for
Yeah.
yourself. Um,
I think it's really important. And one of the things I've always tried to like really struggle for is like the 40-hour work week. You know, if you can dedicate 40 solid hours of work, you can get a lot done in the week. But then you really have enough time on weekdays to like pursue social activities. And on the weekends, you have time to get out and travel and go places.
Sharona, I think you're waving because you're taking off, right? She's got a meeting to go to.
9:30.
You're on mic. She could have said bye. I see how
Oh.
it is. She has a meeting to go off to. But if anybody
Yeah.
else has questions, feel free to jump in and ask, or you can use the chat function on the side there to ask.
Yeah.
It's always weird because I don't want there to be like a big lag so that people can jump in. This is like meta process of doing these videos because I want people to be able to ask questions, but then you don't want downtime, so then people are like waiting patiently to jump in.
Yeah.
If you unmute yourself, I will see that, and then I will stop talking and give you the space to ask questions. So we'll do it like that, or you can ask in the chat. So on top of some of these other things, so you have search and rescue, rocket science, autonomous cars, photography. You also do live streaming. Is that right?
I used to, yeah. For like video games.
Yeah.
Actually, Sarah that I went on the backpacking trip with, she had a small, stint in live streaming, and we did a lot of that together.
Right.
I don't know. Like
you did a podcast for a little bit, right?
Yeah, we did a podcast. That was a lot of fun. It's actually, the studio is still set up in Alex's house. It was just one of those things where it became an issue of like driving an hour to his house to film every episode each weekend. But that's something actually would be really fun to get back into during a quarantine situation like this right now, because it's something to do at home.
Yeah, sure. Well, if you want to do a podcast with me, I'm like content making mode right now. So
there you go.
You let me know what you want to talk about.
What are we doing right now? This is basically a podcast.
That's true. That's true. I'm actually excited that the audio should be good because it comes through Zoom,
right?
And it's separate from the video, which is cool. So we could just throw this into a podcast really easily, I imagine.
Yeah.
But I just to talk about process and whatnot for this, like I think I'm a bit unstructured. Like I don't have like a really rigid beginning, middle, and end.
Right.
And so it doesn't fit into the form of a podcast that would probably be enjoyable to listen. I mean, maybe it's enjoyable to listen to. I haven't gotten like a ton of feedback on just listening and whether that's like the most interesting part about it. But I'd be curious to explore that. But what I guess I keep coming back to, like, a lot of people that have 9-to-5s or professional careers think of themselves as not being very creative, and then therefore they don't end up doing anything creative. Adam comes to mind. He's really creative. He's playing Adam's one of my best friends, and I'm thinking about him playing ukulele, and he's playing he plays music, and he's really good at keyboard, and I was talking to him about being on the show the other day, and he was saying, well, I'm not creative, like I don't, what would I talk about? I was like, I don't
want to be like cliche and be like, oh, everyone is creative, because like there's totally people who are just like, they don't have that mindset, and it's probably only because they weren't given the opportunity to like explore enough to find what they really enjoy being creative at. I feel really lucky that as a kid, like, my parents were like, oh, go play soccer, take karate classes, learn to play trumpet and piano, take photography, that sort of stuff. I did a ton of stuff that, it turns out I didn't really like. I wasn't one of those people that was like pigeonholed into one thing that I had to do for my entire life. Fortunately, I mean, I very well could have been that I took soccer and was like pushed into soccer my whole life and didn't have time for other stuff.
Right.
But I did a couple of years of soccer, and I was like, I don't like this. So I did, photography that really stuck with it. And I think, there's a lot of people out there that just like haven't found like what they really, really enjoy as a creative outlet. And a lot of people, like, they have like hobbies that they don't feel like valid creative outlets. And I really challenge that, because like some people are just like, oh, I just do like paint by numbers. That's totally like a creative outlet. Maybe it's not something where you're going to like, post on Instagram to like brag about like look at this amazing drawing I did. But there's something like therapeutic and like zen about like doing art like that. Like even like small things like crocheting and knitting and other sort of things can be like very like big creative hobbies if you really choose to go down that rabbit hole.
Right. I'm kind of curious if you have some advice for anybody that's doing, let's say advice for someone who's very creative,
Mm-hmm.
but not making money,
Yeah.
or advice for somebody who's making a lot of money, doing their 9 to 5. They feel good about their job, but then feel really stifled on the creative side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any advice about like how to find balance?
I think that, not having money is one of those things where it's like, having money enables you to explore creativity in different ways, but, it's not a requirement to have a creative hobby. Like everyone has a cell phone with a camera. Everyone can go out there and take photos. There are a lot of like really famous Instagram photographers that only use their cell phone. And there's kind of no excuse. It's not, you can't be like, oh, I don't have a $5,000 camera, so therefore I can't be a good photographer. There's a lot of people who have proven that wrong. Another thing too is, there are a lot of hobbies where, spending tons of money doesn't give you any sort of competitive advantage. Coming to mind, I don't want to talk about hobbies I don't know much about, but like, I want to say like things like knitting. Like I know that yarn can get pretty expensive and like needles can get more expensive than you would think, but nobody's out there spending like thousands of dollars unless you're knitting like something super large with fancy yarn.
Right.
It's a relatively approachable hobby, right? And there's other hobbies like, even things that you might not think are creative, but can definitely be like gardening. Gardening is a very approachable hobby if you have just like a small planter box and you want to, construct an aesthetic looking herb garden or something like that.
Which you do. Do you have a garden right now? I know you
Not right
used
now.
to.
I've got a couple plants. They're kind of struggling in my new apartment. The light's a little different here. But I used to live in a house where we had 3 planter boxes that were 12 foot by 4 foot. And we grew a ton of vegetables in there. As you can remember from the cucumber lady story.
Right. Yes. It was so gnarly. There's this woman that made her way back into their backyard. We were playing this game called Don't Starve, which is ironic because then there's this person, you have to deal with all these situations to not like die in the game. Right. And then there was just this person that wandered into the yard that was stealing their vegetables. We had to figure out how to tell her to go away. It was very strange and very funny. So I have a question from our community that's watching. Gandhi would like to know, how did you get interested in engineering, which led to your study of rocket science? We talked about this a little bit earlier, but you can maybe glance over it.
I think, I don't know why, but I kind of just felt like I always knew I was going to be an engineer. It's not like I was like, I was good at math, but I was not particularly great at math. And I was always like playing with Legos as a kid. Legos kind of got that like builder mentality in me of like putting things together, taking things apart, like figuring out how they work. And then also when I was really young, my grandfather was actually a former radio engineer. So he worked at a radio station for most of his life. During World War II, he joined the Navy to work as a radio operator on a naval ship. And when he came back, he went back into radio engineering for like 30 or 40 years. And he was an amateur radio enthusiast as well. And so I remember going over to his house as a kid and going to his shed. And he had tons of like radio parts and like just playing around with them and stuff like that. Really got like curious at a young age about like technology and stuff like that. But I knew that like, I don't know why I had this like mentality when I was a teenager, but like my dad was a software engineer. And I was like, I'm not going to be a software engineer. I can't be whatever my dad is or whatever. I don't know why.
Right.
I just remember like visiting him at work and like seeing these like cubicle farms. And I was like, I don't want to be in a cubicle farm, which is kind of ironic. That's kind of like the situation I work in right now. Except for the open floor plan, of course. But, kind of like the appealing of like being an engineer in certain fields, like you work in like a laboratory with hands-on with equipment. When I was at NASA, I was like building satellites in a laboratory setting. That was a ton of fun. I got into that kind of in high school. I was kind of trying to decide, like, I knew that I wanted to be like an astronaut when I was a kid. And I was like, oh, but should I do like biomedical? Cause it seems like a better, like, career path. I want to make a bunch of money. And I was like, no, I should go into like aerospace. That's what I'm passionate about.
Sweet. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
I'm curious if anybody wants to ask any questions that are in the in the room, feel free to,
Mhm.
you can unmute yourself and ask, or you can ask in the chat. I guess another method is you can send me a text message with questions. Um, so one thing that I'm curious about, and I keep telling myself I'm going to ask people, and I always forget, and I'm glad that I didn't forget this time. I think there are certain motivations for people to create
Mhm.
in general, or to be creative. And I've boiled those down into three sort of pillars that I think hold up most people's motivation for creating. And those are
Right.
curiosity, expression,
Mhm.
and acquisition. And the reason I've broken it into those three categories is because curiosity is, well, I mean, there may be self-explanatory, but like curiosity is a big driving force for me. It's probably
Mhm.
my number one reason why I create any work that I'm creating. It's usually I'll have a
Mhm.
question and I'll want to explore it, and then I'll dive down this rabbit hole. And it's not so much about me wanting to share my soul with other people. Like a lot of people are
Right.
expressive, and they're painting, and they're painting these things that are from their heart or from God or from wherever their creative
Mhm.
tapped into. And that's more of the expressive pillar. And then acquisition is, people make art or things to get something for whatever reason.
Right.
Maybe they are doing it just to make money. They're making YouTube content all the time. They're not really passionate about it from an expressive standpoint. It's not really that curious. They're just like pumping out videos because they know it makes money.
Right.
Or maybe they think it's fun, and like maybe
Right.
fun is in there somewhere. But like, do you have a specific driving force that makes you want to create stuff?
Mhm.
And is that different than the driving force for your professional career?
I don't know. It's like it's so different for like the different types of photography that I do. Um, One of the things that really drives me about like outdoor photography, like nature and landscapes, especially, is like showing people like, look at how like freaking cool this planet that we live on is. And like, you don't have to go to like, Antarctica or like some far off place in like Southeast Asia to like find beautiful scenery. Most of my photography, without the exception of like my Patagonia trip and the one time I went to Europe, is like almost all in California. And these
Mm.
are all places you can drive to in a single day. You can make a day trip out of it, and just see some like really cool scenery and landscapes. And I like to share like, hey guys, I'm super big on nature. I'm super big on like earth preservation. And like, I think by sharing these places, people gain a little more respect and understanding for the beauty of like what's like right in our backyard. There's kind of like a double-edged sword to that, because I know that like there's like this Instagram effect that's kind of worrisome, where like people tag the location of a photo. I'm guilty of this myself. I'll go see a cool photo, like, oh, where was that? I'll go there.
Mm.
And there's like over trafficking of tourism to these like kind of remote destinations that weren't really set up for handling large crowds. Can be
Mm.
pretty detrimental to the area. But I try to look at the positive side that, eventually those places will adapt to the larger crowds, and those crowds will bring tourism money with them to these like smaller towns. Um, a lot of these small communities like depend on tourism for their income, and I think a lot of them right now are probably struggling because there's a lot of tourism going on right now. Yeah, I really like to share like the cool places I've been to for that reason.
Mm.
But for people, it's like a kind of a different story. I don't know. I really like to like take photos of someone and be like, hey, look, this is like how great you look. Like, because a lot of people have like these like poor body image things, uh, like they don't like think that they're beautiful or whatever. And if you take a great photo of them, you're like, hey, look, like this is you. Like, then like to see them like light up in their eyes and be like, oh wow, like I didn't know I could look like that, sort of thing. Especially because a lot of the photos I take are of like my friends who aren't models.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I really like that. I've taken photos of models before, and it's amazing just like how like professional they are, and how aware they are of their like facial expressions and stuff like that. And it's
Mm.
so fun and cool to work with them. But I really prefer to work with like friends who are like amateurs and who like just never thought of themselves as models, because it's so much more fun to kind of like I don't know if it sounds bad, like it's like the challenge, like trying to like bring out that beauty in someone who has like unrefined talent.
Yeah, you're like celebrating people
Yeah,
and how they look to you, and you're using a piece of technology that allows the capturing of beauty, which I think
yeah.
is really cool. That's awesome. Um, yeah, I just think for me, when I think about creativity as
Mm.
being driven by something, like curiosity for me has like led me down all these rabbit holes, which has been really fun. Is there a creative path that you went down that you didn't like? You like went down and you were like, "Nah, this isn't for me," and then you like went out of it?
I mean, there's some. I used to make videos when I was in like high school or so. And I spent a lot of time like planning out scripts and like filming and editing and that sort of stuff. The youth group I was in actually have like a film festival every year. And I think the 2 years that our youth group entered the film festival, my videos won each year. And they're tons of fun to do. I dabbled a little bit in like YouTube and like making vlogs and stuff like that when that was popular. But like, gosh, it's just so time consuming to make videos. And I kind of looked at like some of the stuff that like the people that are famous on YouTube. I was like, oh, okay, so like if I want, I kind of always do this when I start creative hobbies. I wanted to be like famous for this. What would I have to do to like adapt to like the zeitgeist of what's popular? And I was seeing like, oh man, these people are like uploading videos like several times a week, and these videos are like not fast and easy. And, like I have there was a photographer I followed that like documented behind the scenes this process, like going out taking photos, and I thought that was super useful to watch. But then I realized like he was spending hours a day filming and editing all these things. And, I just, I have a job, I have things to do. I don't have time to edit videos like that, but it's super fun. I really do like videography.
Why don't we close up? I think we're like entering our closing phase of our conversation. If
Sure.
anybody has any last minute questions, feel free to do that in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and do it.
Yeah.
Go ahead and do that. And while people are thinking about any questions they might want to ask, why don't you share with us how people can find you? What's the best way to contact you if people want to commission a photo or do some portraiture? How can people find you?
So best way to reach out is on Instagram. Send me a friend request, comment on my photos, send me a DM. I think that's a really good networking tool still to this day, even though it's a much older social network now, not like TikTok where the kids are using these days. It's at Aaron X Cohen on Instagram, AARONXCOHEN, as Matt put in chat. And then the other one is from that Instagram, there's a link to my website, which also has a contact form. Probably a much better way of like making a formal request if you want to like, have your photo taken or something like that. Obviously, I'm not taking any photography gigs right now in the coronavirus crisis. I'm going to maintain social distancing. I have seen some people who have like gone out to like public spaces and like with like super long zoom lenses and like taking photos of each other. I think that's pretty cool, but I just think it's better to stay home right now.
Stay home, everyone.
Yeah.
Great. On that note, stay home. Everybody have fun. If you loved this conversation and want to check out more, you can go to artpluspeople.com/lunch. This has been Creative Lunch Club. I would love to change that name. I think it's good, but also maybe limited to, the lunch time. We don't actually have lunch, so maybe it could just later on be this really funny thing where we just
eat
don't
food.
we don't eat food. And then we talk about how it's just about munching on tasty ideas.
Right.
I don't know, man. Do you have any recommendations for a name? Do you like Creative Lunch Club?
I've gone through this before, and like there is some value in like a really good name, but like just don't stress about like picking a good name. Like people are gonna remember like the content more than they're gonna remember the name of the show.
Well, I'll remember this conversation. I appreciate you for being here.
Yeah, happy to be
here. Everybody enjoy the rest of your day. Stay creative. I haven't figured out what Aaron, why don't you lead us out? Give us a tagline. Something fun.
A tagline?
Put you on the spot.
Be creative, but don't feel the pressure to be creative. There's some actually, real quick before we go, there's something that's really been resonating with me. There's all these like posts that I've seen are like, if you are like not being super productive or like pursuing some new hobby or like starting a business right now, like that's okay. We are in a global health pandemic, and you shouldn't like have this like unreasonable expectation that you're gonna be like extremely creative in this time. But if you are creative and you enjoy that and that's your outlet, I highly encourage it. Keep at it and share your art.
All right, everyone.
Take care.
See you tomorrow.